So I'm Judy Eklund. I first went to paralegal school because I wanted to find out about what happened to my mom. My mom had a stroke, and my sister and I disagreed vehemently about how she should be cared for. And I kept trying to do what Mom wanted to do, and Luann kept doing what was in her best interest, which was. My mother was a very stubborn woman, and so anyway, she died very, very unhappy. And so once I finished paralegal school, I realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do at all. So I went to law school, and I've been a lawyer for a couple of years, and this is my focus, is protecting independence primarily. I wanted to go through what's in the folder. The pamphlet, Senior Information and Assistance, the one I asked for was actually Senior Rights Assistance, but it doesn't matter because these are the people that answer the phone anyway. And they're the people you call if you want to make a will through the wills clinic, or if anybody wants to see a lawyer in the senior elder law clinic. And then this packet just came out. It was an effort between Northwest Justice Project and Seattle University Law School. It has two different powers of attorney, one for finance, one for healthcare. They're separated, which is actually kind of nice. And then it has an advanced directive. And I will go through, I brought two other advanced directives. They're quite different, so I'm going to dwell on them a little bit. So this one, Compassion and Choices, is the one that has the orange frame on it when I get to it. It's very inclusive. And this is the one with the blue frame. I paid $1 for each of these, so if you want to take these, please leave $1 when you take it with you. And then on this side, this is WashingtonLawHelp.org is a wonderful site if you ever need information about any field of law, not just seniors. This is the criteria for the Wills Clinic. Fairly broad, but if you fall into one of those categories, they won't take you because it's only for people with very simple wills. You go in and you talk to a lawyer for an hour, and ahead of time they've sent you a packet for you to think about what you have and who you want to be like executor and who you want to leave your stuff to. And they make a will, and they get witnesses, and they execute it, and you walk out with a valid will. This is a copy of the form they use, but you could fill it in yourself if you wanted to. And then I also included how to execute a will, if you're going to do it yourself, sort of follow the steps. And then I have two different referral sheets for lawyers who do estate planning. I highlighted the different arenas. The second one does Medicaid planning. So if you want to leave assets to your children or your house to your children, but you may need Medicaid long-term care, it's a good idea to work with an attorney ahead of time. You can maneuver that system a little bit.
Do we have, through our EAP benefit, referrals, to an attorney for like an hour consultation or something?
Half-hour consultation?
Half hour.
Yeah.
So you could start by talking to somebody
Sure.
halfway to.
Okay. And then I will get going. I was never a be prepared kind of girl. I just sort of wing it, but man, not when it comes to getting older. I'm starting with a story. This is about a woman that I tried to help and I was not successful. Her name isn't actually Sally. I'm protecting myself mostly. She is a wonderful, lively woman. She spent her life working on the railroad. She started out at entry level and worked up to being an advocate for people who are facing reprimand type things for the railroad workers. And she had a fairly good pension between the railroad pension and Social Security. She had about $3,000 a month. She had a loving family, including 4 husbands. I think working on the railroad is sort of a very sexy way to make your living. However, her children were all in different states. She had the closest was a daughter in Portland, a son in Eugene, and another daughter in Corpus Christi. She was an avid collector, mostly art, particularly black art and music. She met a number of musicians and had tapes of them live. She herself was an artist. She also had a Disney collection and dishes and just all kinds of things. She was very meticulous about how they were organized, and I talked to a niece of hers who said she loved to go visit their house because it was like going to a museum. And her 4th husband built the house that she lived in, and she promised him that she would live there until she died. When she got older and she couldn't be quite so active in the community, she would sit on the front porch and wave to people going by. And there were a lot of them because she lived right next to a park with a running path that went right by her house. She's very sociable. And I am talking about her because she came up with problems, of course. Her collection became overwhelming. Between it taking up too much space and having to weave through it and keeping it dusted and everything, it was totally out of control. The people who ended up taking care of her just called it a hoarder house. And she developed serious health problems, pretty significant heart disease, diabetes, and fairly early stages of dementia. She would forget to turn off the stove. This is a classic problem children worry about. More important for her is she forgot to take her medicine all the time, and because she's diabetic, she would black out in the front yard. Luckily, she was always in the front yard, so people saw her and called 911. And off to the hospital she went. Her daughter would drive up from Portland. And they attempted a number of solutions. Both of her children in Oregon wanted her to come stay with them, which is an excellent solution, but she didn't want to live in Oregon. She wanted to live in Washington, and she didn't want her children to take care of her. She raised them to be independent and live their own life, and she didn't want to be a burden. That's a very common mindset for people. They don't want to be a burden to their children. And she didn't like it, and she was very familiar with the railroads, and the railroad went through both of those cities, so she just hopped on and came back home. Her daughter in Portland was on a joint bank account with her so she could get the bills to be automatic and all that stuff, and they had worked that all out. She just unplugged the stove. She stopped using it. She had an agreement with a Vietnamese couple about a quarter of a mile away who had a restaurant, and every night she'd walk there, or if she was tired, she'd take a cab, which was great because then she got the exercise and ate very healthy food, and she loved what they cooked, and it was very friendly. So the rest of the time she just relied on microwave, which is very doable. It's practically how I live. But forgetting the medicine was a problem. There are things you can do, even if you live alone. They use like GPS technology, and they can tell if you've taken your medicine, and if the time comes when you're supposed to take it and you didn't, they can call you and remind you. But she didn't know about that, or whatever, maybe too expensive, I don't know how much it cost. It wasn't happening, and so off she went to the hospital, and her daughter drove up from Portland, but this time she didn't want to go back to Oregon with her daughter, and she was quite adamant, so they put her in a nursing home. The daughter was determined determined to get her back into her house. So she was going to try and deal with all the collection stuff, but her daughter had serious dust allergies, and so that was a problem. And every time she drove up, she spent her mother's money on gas. She couldn't stay in the house, so she'd rent a hotel room and eat in restaurants. And she got her cousins to help try and clear out the house, and she paid them. So the money wasn't being paid to the nursing home for the most part. She made a few payments, but nothing like what it cost private pay. And the social worker there was trying to help her apply for Medicaid. Sally couldn't remember what she did with the documentation that she needed, and the daughter couldn't find it and didn't like going in the house to look for it. And so month after month went by and it didn't get done. And this is a sign to APS that this is a financial abuser. And she didn't keep good accounting of the money that she spent. And so they just labeled her financial abuser of her mother. And the nursing home sent a lawyer off to court to petition for guardianship. When you're threatened with a guardianship, you have a right to an attorney who is supposed to do whatever you want them to do on your behalf. However, this particular lawyer didn't even bother to come meet her until 3 days before the hearing. And much to Sally's surprise, when she got to the hearing, the lawyer said, "Oh, I think she's okay with it." The court relies on a doctor's report to say that you are incompetent and how much care you need. And you have a right for the investigator to talk to your choice of doctor. Usually it would be your primary care physician. She had one at Group Health that she'd been going to for years, but they didn't use her doctor. They used the nursing home's doctor. And of course he said, "Oh, she's incompetent and she needs 24-hour care." And daughter came up, she said, "Yeah, I think mom probably does need a guardian, but it should be me." And she tried to explain about the money and what her plans were, but they were going for it. And she was appointed a professional guardian. She lost most of her civil rights. And I was quite shocked that they don't go through each right separately. You just lose all of them. Bim, boom, bam. Not even a consideration except the right to vote. So she can't marry, enter into a contract. She can no longer make a will or appoint a power of attorney. She can't sue or be sued, although her guardian can. She can't drive. She can't own or rent property except through her guardian. She can no longer refuse medical treatment. She cannot choose her own caregivers or even her own friends if that becomes an issue. She can still vote. Sally was not prepared for this to happen to her. She was weeping and she looked at me and she said, "I worked hard all my life. I paid my taxes. I never broke the law. I never hurt anybody. I was helpful to a lot of people. Why are they punishing me?" She broke my heart. And there is a movement in the state to change guardianship a lot so that you get support for decision making and you don't lose all your rights. But it's slow going. Now supposedly, there's a law that says a nursing home cannot detain you against your will. However, they do it all the time. They lock the doors, you can't get out. And a guardian cannot put you in a nursing home against your will. But that's kind of touchy because you have a right to not live where you don't want to live, but you don't have a right to live where you do want to live. They were not going to let her go back home. They offered adult family home or assisted living, but she said if I can't live at home, I might as well stay here. If only she had had a durable power of attorney. She could have saved a lot of money. A guardianship is very expensive, and you pay for just about all of it. She had to pay for her own attorney, for the investigator for the court that they call guardian ad litem, and for the guardian's attorney. And for that first hearing alone, it was $10,000. And a professional guardian is very expensive. The hourly expense is a lot. They don't spend a whole lot of time at it. If you have less than $3,000 in resources, which she didn't have $3,000 left, all she had was her house. So as soon as they got appointed, they put in a petition to sell the house. No effort at all to try and figure out a way for her to stay there, since it was so important to her. And they had an auction to sell her collections to get whatever money they could, and everything else they threw away. The children were welcome to have what they wanted of her things after the auction, but they had to be able to list them. They couldn't come look at it. They had to send a list, and they left that stuff out. Sally had a bunch of art that they got all of her art. But other than that, gone. If you have less than $3,000, the county pays for the attorneys, her attorney and the court investigator. DSHS doesn't actually pay the guardian, but they allow part of your Social Security check to go for the guardian. And the guardian has to pay for her own attorney. This is important. She could have chosen her own agent, her own power of attorney. She and her guardian were kind of, and I was trying to find her a guardian that she had a real rapport with, but that was put down very quickly. There are two things to consider when choosing power of attorney. One is compatible values. They are supposed to, both power of attorney and guardian are supposed to use the standard of substituted judgment, which means what you would have done before you lost capacity. And so if you choose somebody who both knows what you would have done and will honor that, that's what you want, particularly for health care. And then trustworthy for your financial stuff, of course. Usually it's someone from your family, and doctors and healthcare providers are most comfortable with that, but it doesn't have to be, especially if they're spread out across the country. Particularly for her, with so much in the way of health problems, she would have needed somebody nearby. And besides, her daughter was too bossy. She didn't want her. A good friend is a good idea, but it is quite a lot to ask from a friend. You could also hire a professional power of attorney, and that way she could have interviewed several and chosen the one that got along with her. She wouldn't have lost any rights. Her power of attorney would have had to be able to work with her and not just tell her what she had to do. And in my powers of attorney, I put down judgments that I would make. For example, my husband likes to drink. If I'm that far gone that I need a guardian, I want to be able to drink. I don't care if it's going to make my life shorter. I like it. I've been an alcoholic my whole life, and I would like to remain an alcoholic. Or I want to eat real food. I don't want some dietitian giving me fake eggs and turkey bacon. I want delicious food for as long as I'm still living. That kind of thing you can put in your power of attorney because you are competent at that time, and you're letting them know what's important to you and what you would have done while you had capacity. You can revoke the power of attorney, so if it's not working out. Now, if you're somebody like Sally who's rambunctious, You definitely want a backup and maybe even 2 or 3 backups if you're likely to fire your powers of attorney. And then the new one steps into the shoes of the old one. And they would have been able to figure out some way for her to stay in her house, which was so important to her. And if a guardianship were necessary, because she was very stubborn, you can nominate your guardian in your power of attorney document, and the judge will always appoint that person unless he's shown good cause why not. And in this case, if it had been her daughter, he wouldn't have appointed her, at least not guardian of the finance, might have been of healthcare decisions. They can split those up or not. So staying in your home, there's a number of problems that seniors run up against. Almost everyone says, I want to live in my home until I die. But they often also say, but I don't want to be a burden to my children. So some of the problems are not keeping up. For example, with all of her collections, it was out of hand. The housework needs to be done. You don't need to do it yourself. My mom put cards up at the local community college, and she had 3 or 4 different people. One would do housekeeping, one would shop, and one would do yard work, and one would do the mowing the lawn. But if your house is a big mess, they will come in and look around and say, you're not taking care of yourself, you need a guardian. And definitely, if you have a tendency toward hoarding, you're going to have to deal with that. If there are a number of stories about cat ladies with litter pans and litter and all over the floor, and it stinks and there's bugs, and that's a problem. This is the main one, isolation. If they don't think it's safe for you to live alone 24 hours a day, you can't get copes for more than about 8 hours, and that's if you're lucky. If you can figure out a way to have someone stay with you, family would be great, but like you could rent a room to a college student, particularly a nursing student, and decrease the rent, and they might watch out for you a little bit. I don't know, but if you're determined to stay in your home, you might think about figuring out a way to have somebody else there. And falls. If you fall, break your hip, you go to the hospital, you go to rehab, and you're not ready to be alone 24/7, you're not likely to go back to your house at all. It happens a lot. So, take a look at your house and fix your house. If your house has stairs, look at that main room and see if you could make that into a living space. Put your bedroom in the dining room or something. I mean, or when you're going to buy a house, buy one you could grow old in. Slippery floors and throw rubs are a particular problem. You can't see as well, and your balance is shaky. Your kitchen cupboards are awful. They're like way over your head, and you have to open the door and you can't see, and you shouldn't be climbing on step ladders. If you could gradually buy those things where you pull it out and you can see what's in there, and move things down to where you can reach them. And to fix your bathroom, just keep in mind that you can't see real well and you're shaky, or you might have a wheelchair. You could gradually adjust your bathroom. And then fix yourself. Take up dancing or something. Or while you're in the line at the market, stand on one foot. I mean, the two things are balance and bone strength for preventing falls. Go for walks every day, or join Silver Sneakers or something. Now, as far as keeping your home in the family, there are a number of hazards. Aggressive realtors, this is a form of financial abuse. I have a house that I rent to somebody who doesn't keep it up real well, and I must get weekly offers. You must want to sell your house. Here's $1. Keep me in mind if you ever decide to sell your house. Also, from that angle, reverse mortgages. You can lose your house through a reverse mortgage. It could be just the very thing to allow you to stay there, but it's something to be very cautious about. A professional guardian will sell your house in a minute because there's such an extreme difference between what they're paid privately and what they're paid publicly. There's the reverse mortgage. Medicaid will have a lien on your house. They don't get your house. They don't have title to it, but they would have a lien on it. For whatever they've paid out for you, you'll have to sell your house, or your heirs would have to sell your house to pay that off. You can give your home to family members, to your spouse, no problem. If you have a sibling or a child, they would have to live there with you for a while and take care of you to the extent that you didn't need Medicaid, and then you can give them the house without any penalty. If that's also with money, if you give it away 5 years before you need Medicaid, you're home free. Otherwise, you can't give money away, and you have to spend it all, so you won't be leaving anything in your will anyway. So that's all on powers of attorney. Does anybody have questions?
Were you able to do anything for Sally?
No. No, she's in a nursing home right down the street here, and her stuff is all gone, and her house got sold, and she paid $60,000 for her lawyers and guardians. And it was more expensive because they all got paid for fighting me. I didn't get paid, but they all did. It was dreadful.
Is it ever possible to change the court's decision?
Yes, yes. You can petition to modify the guardianship. I don't think she wants to try. She was pretty devastated, and she figures one guardian can do the same thing. I mean, her house is gone now. There's not a whole lot of point. There's nothing really to fight for unless she wanted to try and get her daughter. And she was pretty effectively labeled an abuser, so I don't think that would happen either. She may still be able to get a guardian she likes better. But I got blacklisted. Anyway. So the living will, the one that I gave you is the one with the Northwest Jersey Project. The other two I'm going to talk about are back there. You can pick them up if you want. And I'm just going to go through what's in it. So it's an assertion of your legal right to refuse medical treatment, but you can always choose medical treatment. I had a client who was a Catholic, and so in all those categories, no, I want this, I want this, I want this. Jesus will take me when he's ready for me. When does it apply? That depends on which form you use. All of them, and it's in the statute. If you're diagnosed with a terminal condition and they don't expect you to live more than 6 months. I use this picture, I love this picture, because it reminds me of my dad. He died of cancer, and he looked about like that. It was awful, he was miserable. But my sister's little toddler always came to visit him, and she was the one thing that could just make his face light up. It was great. Or to be in a coma. This is one they don't expect you to awake from. My husband said he couldn't tell that was Sleeping Beauty, so I labeled her. I didn't put an orange thing around it, but this one talks about comas. And it sort of sets it aside separately in case, because with a coma, you might wake up. And so you can say how long you want them to wait. Or you can leave it up to your doctor. Or persistent vegetative state. Now the one I gave you in your folder does not include this. I don't know why. It's fairly standard. Does anybody know who this woman is? That's Terry Scheibel before her accident. And she's the poster child for advanced healthcare directives. So now this one with the orange frame includes a whole bunch of other categories which make me a little bit nervous. But total dependence on others, it could be that if Sally had one of these and she was dependent on others, she could refuse all this medical care. I'm not sure if it would have worked, but it might. For me, no, if I'm dependent, that's tough. They'll just have to take care of me. I'm filling this out as though it were for me. Severe pain, no. I plan to be a fairly interesting dementia case myself. And then there's the treatments that you refuse or not. So CPR, use of a respirator, artificially provided nutrition. I have a client who has a tube in his stomach. He's very much alive. So it's not necessarily that big of a deal. Hydration, unless I'm thirsty. I know my mother was thirsty. She couldn't swallow. She had a healthcare directive. She didn't want any artificial hydration, but she was so thirsty. She would ask for a little bit of water. She was so pitiful. But anything I gave her just made her vomit. Very sad. Antibiotics, surgeries to prolong life. Yeah, if I'm dying, I don't need surgeries. Dialysis, some of this stuff just seems really extreme to me. Blood transfusions, pain medication. They always say, even though it might make me drowsy or sleep more or even hasten my death, even my Catholic client wanted the pain medication. Now this is important, and this is in the one that's in your folder. You can change your mind at any time. So if you said in your healthcare directive, I don't want this, even if you have lost capacity and they won't listen to you for regular healthcare treatment, you can change your mind about these things that you've refused if you want to stay alive. The problem with that is you have to be able to communicate that to your doctor. So additional considerations are not, there's a section in this one in the folder where you can write things in, but it only has about that much space. These two have fairly extensive additional considerations. So the one with the orange is this white one. And again, I filled out the values worksheet as though it were for me. This gives an indication if you have a guardian for sure, but for your power of attorney, what's important to you and your doctors and everybody who's taking care of you. I'm not spiritual. I have a certain interest in living as long. I want to live to 100. When I was a kid, they told me I wouldn't live to be an adult, and so here I am, and I'm a lawyer, and I'm working on 100. But there comes a point where it's just not worth it. But being independent, I guess I'm just like my mom. That's very important to me. Free of physical limitations. You know, I used to put a 4 there because I hate physical limitations. But if it's my limitations and I can't do things, then that's all right. I can adjust. And as I said, I'm liable to have dementia, so I want to be interested. I don't care about leaving money to my husband's children. So he plans to die first. That's pretty risky. He better have a good will. And I don't care if it takes me a long time to die or if my care is expensive. Now this is the blue one. They go into all kinds of interesting things. And this is just a sampling. This is also something you can do your own version online and have it just be specific to you, but you always have to pay for it. So if I'm depressed, I want happy meds. I feel a certain caveat about that. I'd like to put in my power of attorney for my substituted judgment section. If I don't like the side effects of some medicine and I complain about it, I want you to take me off that medicine. I hate medicine. Side effects can be awful. Warm baths, I hate warm baths. Fresh and clean. Hospice, the hospice folks for my mother were wonderful. How I want people to treat me. I'd like someone there when I'm actually dying. I want to be talked to. You can tell by the picture I didn't have much interest in that. I definitely don't want religious readings and poems. I way don't want to have people praying for me. At least not in my room. This one, I crossed out the cheerfulness and sadness because they can be sad if they want. I still like them to care for me with kindness. I desperately want to die in my home looking out my window. That's like the gift from heaven is the view out that window, and that's where I want to die. One, I want my loved ones to know I'm not nearly forgiving enough, that I love them, that I wish to be forgiven, forget that I forgive them, I do not. I'm still not talking to my sister, Lynn. My husband thinks it's weird that I don't fear death. But I don't. But I don't believe in the afterlife. I hope they can make peace with each other. Yeah, that's not my problem. Remember me as I was before I got so sick. My time dying is a time of personal growth. Actually, there's something to that. At least when I was with my mom, that was a very moving experience. Remember me with joy, and I would like my body to be cremated and scattered. I'm going to have a list of places I want my ashes to be scattered. And if there's a memorial service, I want these sayings and this music to be played there. This has to be signed in front of witnesses, two people who know you, who are not family and not healthcare providers. But they need to know you enough to think that you're competent to do this thing. And that's all I have about living wills. Any questions about those? Okay, last will and testament, I have another story. This is about a man named John. He bought a tugboat and a barge, and he went up and down the coast and bought used industrial equipment. And he essentially opened an industrial junkyard, very successful. He had a lovely wife named Evelyn and a son, Johnny. Johnny was learning disabled. He learned how to read and write, and he could drive once he was old enough. He loved to have his picture taken. He loved going to parties and festivals, and he loved paying practical jokes. Dad John, made a will. To his wife, he left their waterfront property, an investment account, and their personal bank accounts, but no interest in his successful business. But what about community property? I forgot to mess with this picture a little more. He started his business before he got married. That makes it separate property. Separate property stays separate property, and any money that it makes is also separate property. However, what he paid himself is community property. And so she would get his Social Security and whatever was in the bank accounts and their house, but that's all. She was not very happy with that. In his will, he had a trust for Johnny because he didn't trust him to make good decisions. And this way he would be able to live his whole life in the manner he was accustomed, and somebody else would deal with all that boring stuff. As my professor said, trusts are for those you don't. There's also a number of other reasons to have trusts. They're a really good way to help give a little extra cash to people who are on Medicaid. You're not actually giving it to them, but it can be spent on them without messing up their Medicaid. Also a good way to avoid inheritance taxes. Not all of them, but you can minimize them. So anyway, time passed. John developed serious heart disease and didn't have long to live. Evelyn hated his will and was determined to get him to change it. She hounded him. And 3 months before he died, he changed the will. He left everything to Evelyn outright, which made her very happy. 10 years after that, Evelyn also died, and she didn't believe her son would have any problems. She left everything to him outright. However, Johnny got sick even before Mom died, and he didn't want to stress her out, so he didn't seek any medical care until after she died, and that was dumb, because he was seriously ill. He had really good insurance, but he reached the cap. That was before Obamacare, and so he was paying for all of his very expensive care, and he felt he had to sell his interest in the business. He already had made a will while his mom was alive. He left everything, he split it between his favorite aunt, who was the only one that was still alive anyway, she was a kick, and his favorite cousin, who had always worked in his father's yard, and so he was sort of part of the family. And this is unusual. If either one of them were to die before Johnny, their share would go to the survivor of those two. Usually it would go to the person who died, their heirs, their children. And Betty did die before he did, so it would all go to Craig. While he was sick, another cousin became his best friend in the world, convinced him he was a wonderful guy, and wouldn't he like to contribute all of his money to this project that Terry had for finding missing children. And Johnny decided to change his will. So he would split the estate between Betty and his cousin Terry. The lawyer brought in a draft, he looked through it, he made a few changes, and then he signed it. And the lawyer said, wait, don't sign it yet, you have to have witnesses, it's just a draft. Do you want to sign the will? Do you want me to get witnesses? He said, no. Type it up and we can do it later. But he died before that happened. So the will was signed but not witnessed, not a valid will. We need 2 witnesses. His estate, the house was worth about 1.6 mil and about 4 million, which is what was left from his father's half of the business, which he had with his brother. The first will was accepted to probate, but Terry brought a will contest. They had 2 arguments. The first was that the second will should be accepted. It was what Johnny wanted. There was actually 1 witness because the lawyer was there and saw him sign it. And if it wasn't executed properly, it was his lawyer's fault, and so they should accept the will. That didn't go anywhere. The second argument was that the second will repealed the first will because it said, I hereby revoke all prior wills, and he signed it. That was a more valid argument, and that one went to trial. To revoke a will, you either need a new will, or you can burn, tear, cancel, obliterate, or destroy the old one. And the burning and obliterating didn't happen, and it wasn't a new will because it didn't meet the definition of a will. So he lost that will contest. The first will was not revoked. And it was now going through probate. When you probate a will, creditors are paid first. In fact, the very first to be paid is your lawyer. Now, when I was studying for the bar exam, the guy who was explaining this kind of thing had a good argument for why that's so important for the lawyer to be paid first, but I don't remember. Next is any unpaid taxes. Johnny did not like paying taxes, so he didn't. So there were quite a few. He also didn't like paying bills. In fact, he had a chute put in the garage for the mail, and there was a mountain of mail there that he just never, so he had all kinds of overdue bills, and especially the hospital bill. So he owed a lot of money in bills. He never had any Medicaid, but that's one of the things you have to consider during probate. His accountant made a good sum. And at that time, the exemption for federal inheritance tax was $2 million. His estate was worth more than that, so he paid a significant amount in inheritance taxes, both state and federal. The exemption now is $5 million, so if he died later, then he would have been fine. Or I guess Craig would have been fine. But he was still left with waterfront property and $1.2 million, which made him quite happy. But what if Terry had prevailed and the estate would go to the heirs at law? This is what happens if you die without a will. It follows this statute called Descent and Distribution Statute. So the estate was worth about $2.8 million. Because it was separate property, inheritance is also separate property, it would go half and half to wife and children. If it were community property, it would all go to the wife. However, he never had wife or children. And so at that point, it goes up through the parents. The descent and distribution statute moves vertically always. And so first it goes up to the parents and then it goes down to their bloodline, which would be his siblings. So his mother, they were both dead, of course, but his mother had a daughter, was his half-sister, but she was already dead. However, she had a son, but he was also already dead. So at that point, it goes up through the parents to the grandparents, and at this point, it's split half and half. Each side of the family gets half. And then you look to see what children they have. So they had quite a few children, but they were all dead. Betty was the last to go. Then you look to see if they had any children. Of course, his parents didn't leave any live heirs. Fern left a couple. Betty left 3, including Terry. Craig was Fern's son. Bill left 3. So this side of the family splits equally that $1.4 million. They each get $175,000. On this side of the family, Hank had 1 daughter. Anna had no children, so she's not part of the consideration. Mary had 2, and Patricia, but they both died. Patricia had 1. So at this point, you're looking at those 2 who died to see if they had any children. Dorothy didn't leave children, but Helen had 6. So on this side of the family, it's split 3 ways. Each of their first cousins would get 1/3 of that half of the estate, and the 6 first cousins, once removed, would split the other 1/3. And that's how it would be distributed. And that's the end of my presentation. Any questions? Yes.
Like, you know, when you get checked in for a hospital for like a surgery, they'll always ask, do you have a living will?
Uh-huh.
Is that something you should bring to the hospital? Is that
Yes,
okay?
yes, they'll make a copy of it. They'll want to see your original, so take it, they'll make a copy, and they will be very happy. And they will have a form for you to fill out if you don't have one already. But yeah.
And then just the terms, the durable power of attorney is the power you give a guardian?
No.
No, the terms are confusing to me.
A guardian gets her power, it's almost always a woman, from the court. The power you give a power of attorney, I call them power of attorney. The formal name, the proper name for them is your attorney in fact. It comes from Old French. Attorney means agent. And when it went to England, they would have an attorney at law, an attorney at equity, and an attorney in fact. So at law is for criminal court, for equity is for like civil court, and attorney in fact was for everyday dealings. And that's how the power of attorney came to be called that. It's very confusing because you're not an attorney. And the power that you give your power of attorney is shared. You don't lose any power. You're not giving it away. You can both make decisions. But they have complete power to do things on your behalf, quite unlimited.
And I had also heard that on one of the financial advisors, and they weren't trying to avoid inheritance taxes, but like if I had a house and I had kids and I will it to them, they have to pay a lot of transfers and possibly not get the house for some period of time because it's going through the court to determine. But versus if you have them, I don't know if it was a cosign or put them like with your name as, like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And is
like joint tenants with right of survivorship kind of thing. Or you could have a life estate in it, so you own it while you're alive, and then as soon as you're dead, it belongs to them.
So what's that called?
A life estate.
A life estate, okay.
You can put your house in that kind of form. Medicaid will not go for that unless you've done it 5 years before you need Medicaid. But if that's the case, they won't have a lien on it. You still have to pay creditors. Before anybody can get the house, creditors have to be paid one way or another, even if it's not going through probate. If you manage to do it all outside of probate, the creditors can come after you forevermore. If you do it during probate, the creditors have 4 months to get their act together and come after you, and after that, you're protected from creditors. Whereas if you do it like your life estate thing, and there are creditors, they will come after you, and they can do it forever. Okay?
What's the most important document to do first?
From my perspective, the most important document is power of attorney. And it takes the most thought, and it's the one that can protect you largest. But it's also the one you're liable to meet first. Yeah.
So the wills and the power of attorney will make in Washington is only good for Washington if we move to different
No,
states?
other states honor the wills from other states. Like, for instance, Washington doesn't have common law marriage. If another state does have common law marriage, they will recognize that common law marriage within the will. But yeah, no, it's fine. Go to another state, it will be fine.
But not internationally.
Even internationally, there was a Vietnamese will, and it was written in Vietnamese, and all that she did was get it translated, and the court honored that in Washington. Any more questions? Okay.
Okay.